to emerge, and this is back in the 1890s, 1894 to 99. Marconi did some very interesting experiments over in Europe and found that he could create a big spark, and it would send a signal that was receivable. And they were all excited because first it went a couple miles, then it went 25 miles. And anyway, they created a radio out of this, and it took a huge amount of band spectrum. Now, the electromagnetic frequencies are limited. They're not go on forever, so they're limited. So the idea nowadays is to use the least amount of bandwidth that you can to communicate with. Some interesting developments in radio, and I won't bore you along with this. I think it was fascinating. And if you ever want to know what happened to Channel 1 for your TV, I can refer you to the website. Interesting story. Anyway. Radios were huge to begin with. With the advent of vacuum tubes, this was a huge development. And this made a tremendous difference in the way radios could be made. They could be made much smaller and far more powerful. Interesting thing, there was lots of advancements in the vacuum tube, and this just really made a difference in how the radio signals could be communicated. As this became commercialized in the early 1900s, interesting, sad thing that I learned is part of the devastation of the Titanic, there were two competing factions for radio dominance in the commercial world. And this was during maritime Marines. And so sad. And it came down to a matter of pride. If a certain communication was heard to be from Company A as opposed to Company B, they wouldn't respond to it. And because they used different codes in their Morse code, they could tell who was sending it. So certain ships never responded to the disaster signal only because it was given by a different company than they were working for. And it delayed dramatically the opportunity for other ships to come to the rescue. So politics enters into radio all the way through this history. 1961, amateur radio now is getting into space with the launch of the Oscar satellite. You can actually relay signals through the satellite, the amateur radio. 70s was big time for radio, but it was becoming stagnant. Drop in amateur radio licenses kind of held at about 250,000 in the U.S. and just kind of stayed there. And one of the things that they did that made it jump up, can anyone think of what it might have been? They eliminated Morse code as a requisite for licensing. And that occurred in 1991. Well, it soared to 500,000, then up to 710,000. Today, it sits right at about 850 to 900,000 amateur radio licenses. Now, interestingly enough, the whole world is divided up and given a number. For example, my call sign is KR6BA. Anytime you hear a 6 in a call sign, it's California. They gave California their own number. There are so many amateur radio operators in California. Arizona, Utah, verse 7. Arizona, Utah, Oregon, all of those are 7s, and it moves across the U.S. And when you hear a call sign, you can tell about where it's coming from. So in contests and so forth, when these guys have these big contests and they're trying to get contacts all over the world, a 6 hardly will be ever responded to because they're a dime a dozen. They want all the exotic numbers. Let me tell you a little bit about radio, some things, and we'll talk a little bit about the differences between some of the communication things that Corey has talked about, why the church has selected, and not only the church for that, but why many emergency response organizations have selected amateur radio as their mode of communication. And there are good reasons for that. First of all, does anyone know how fast a radio signal travels? It's actually about the same speed as light. Just a touch under, but it's so little that they don't even make the difference on there. So it's about the speed of light. On an HF band, when you key up your band and transmit, when you say a word, in 1 second, it's gone around the world 7.5 times. That's how fast it travels. Okay, where did the word ham radio come from? You choose. There's a zillion of them here, and some of them are so silly that I won't go on with that. But they talked about guys at Harvard named Hyman, Almy, and Murray, and they created the first little amateur radio station. When they were about to be wiped out by the big federal government and taken away, they went and pleaded their case, and they talked about these 3 little college students who happened to be H-A-M initials. They called it the Little Ham Station. Not a dry eye in Congress, and they allowed them their frequency spectrum. ARRL, who's the governing body of amateur radio in the United States, has researched that. They cannot find any Hyman, Almy, or Murray at Harvard during those times. Highly unlikely that was it.
Sounds good.
You know what? Some of these sound pretty plausible, but anyway. If you hear the word amateur, you know, you can hear the hamateur, ham, come right out of it. They talk about a Cockney accent from England, screwing it up, and you hear amateur, or however they say it over there. Nothing on that either. Morse code was a big thing because the transition from telegraph to wireless included many of the telegraph guys. Now these guys were professionals. They were smooth. They could really go on that key when they were sending Morse code. So a lot of these guys, when the wires were cut and it went wireless, they moved over, professionally speaking, into wireless. But the wireless communication was still a lot of it Morse code. Morse code is a very efficient way to send a message, really, if you know it, because it takes very, very little bandwidth, and it cuts right through interference, where voice can get wiped out by interference, atmospheric, or other stations and so forth. So they still send a lot of their messages via Morse code. The pros that came in and heard the amateurs doing Morse code, because a lot of the amateurs now took jobs as Morse code senders. They referred to them, because they were so bad at it, as ham-fisted. I like that one. So I stick with the ham-fisted. And, you know, because it's really hard to offend an amateur person, because you're a little, except for these guys, you're a little goofy to be one. You can't, so they probably took it as a compliment when they said they were ham-fisted. Interestingly enough also, and as I get older and I don't hear the way that I think I ought to be hearing, to enhance the signal off of the little receiver in the Morse code, they used to take a tobacco tin lid and set on top of the speaker, and it enhanced the signal. Well, that was just no good as far as the pros were concerned. And, you know, if you couldn't hear it, you didn't belong there. But it enhanced and amplified the sound for the ham-fisted guys, and that is where the term "he has a tin ear" came from.